left off with our last video, we had programmed the first two lines, lines 1 and 2, that gave us the top part of our elephant's ears. Right over here in the picture, everything that we have there, we can see in the black screen over here on the right. What I've done in between that video and this video is write down a couple of more print statements for the next few lines of our elephant. However, what I want to point out to you is that what I've done is actually a very poor programming practice, especially when you're just learning how to code. And why this is a poor programming practice is that I've written several lines of code, and you can tell that I have not run the code or compiled it because while these print statements appear over here in my text editor, the corresponding output is not in the black screen. You see the output of the first two lines, but then lines 3 through 6 do not appear over here on the black. And what that means is I've written them and I have not yet push run in REPL. The reason that this is a poor programming practice is that when we are learning, we make a whole lot of mistakes. And we all know, actually, it's not just when we're learning that we make a lot of mistakes. All programmers make a lot of mistakes. And it's very good programming practice to write only a little bit of code and then to run it to make sure that your code doesn't have any mistakes in it. If I write many, many, many lines of code and then I hit run and something is the matter, it can be a lot harder to figure out in all of those many, many lines of code where the problem is. So actually, if I run this code right now, there are some slight problems with what's over here on the right. And it can be a little bit difficult, given that many new lines of code just appeared, to figure out where the problem is. So I could separate out. We had run our code with just lines 1 and 2, and everything looked fine, but things look a little off here. So we know that there's a problem somewhere between what are now lines 4 through 7 of the code. In fact, there may be several mistakes, but they're a little harder to trace than if I would have just compiled one line at a time. As an exercise, pause the video and take a look very closely at the elephant that we have over here in the grid, what's written in the text editor, and what's appearing over here in our executable, and see if you can figure out where the problems are. So pause the video and see if you can figure that out, and after you've given that a good solid try, resume the video. Now that you're back, there were actually 3 problems with what we have on the screen right here. The first of which is, I have the correct string right here in line 4, except for the fact that it's not shifted over enough to the right. I need to add one more space to the beginning to shift everything properly on the elephant. Now line 5 actually contains 2 problems, because when you take a look at line 5 with what's written there, what's in the picture over here, and what's appearing in the executable, at the beginning things seem properly lined up according to what's above it. But because I need to shift line 4 over one more space, I need to do the same thing in line 5. However, things aren't properly lined up the whole way between lines 4 and 5. It looks like this part of the ear is also not shifted far enough over, and in fact that's because I'm missing a space in between my forward slash and my backslash as well. So I need an additional space there, in addition to the space that I needed up here. Now, if I rerun my code, things should look pretty nice. What I'm going to do is come back up here to line 3, and I'm going to make a note for us as programmers about what we just discussed. So this will be visible when I post this code to Schoology later on. And the Python programming language allows you to make what's called comments in your code by typing another special character. So we've discussed how the backslash could actually be read as the escape character. There's another character in Python that has a special meaning, and that's the hashtag, otherwise known as the pound sign, and also known as the octothorpe, which is the actual technical name for this symbol, octothorpe. I think most of you know it as the hashtag. If you're a little bit older, you might know it as the pound sign. And there are even other words that you might know for this symbol. But whatever you want to call it, hashtag, pound sign, octothorpe, what happens when I type that in first is I'm sending a message to the compiler that says, do not read this line of code. This is not for the computer to try to parse. And what that allows us to do is write in English for a while to leave messages for either ourselves or to anyone else who might be reading our code. So I could come in here and say something along the lines of, it is good practice to compile often. And what happens when I run this code is that nothing changes, because when the compiler gets to that hashtag and sees it, it ignores everything until we get to a new line, and then it starts reading again as though it's looking for code. So this is a way that we can make comments in our code when we're programming in Python, and we will want to make comments often. At this point, we're doing rather well. We only have 2 lines of the elephant to go, so I wanted to take a moment to show you one more option. The reason I stopped here in our elephant is that when we get to this row, we're going to need to print to the screen a quotation mark. And we've discussed how we would do that, but I wanted to show you an alternative option here. So one thing we could do for this line is we could put in our double quotes for the string literal that we want to print in this line. We do 2 spaces, a vertical line, 2 spaces, vertical line, 4 spaces, vertical line, a dash, and then if we want to print to the screen a quotation mark, we could put backslash quotation mark, and when we run this code, the computer will read this quotation mark and the last quotation mark as doing the job of encasing the string literal, and when it encounters this backslash character, it will not print a backslash. It will pair the backslash with the quotation mark that comes next to it and say, ah, you want me to stop for just 1 character's worth of reading this quotation mark in Python, and you want to really and truly print that as a character as opposed to the quotation marks used in Python. So when I run that, that's one way that I can get those quotation marks on the screen. Here is another way. So let me comment out that line of code for a moment and show you another way that we could do that. And that's to print in between single quotes instead of double quotes. The same thing that we printed before. 2 spaces, vertical line, 2 spaces, vertical line, 4 spaces, vertical line, 2 spaces, vertical line, dash, quotation. And if I run that, again, nothing changes, but our code actually did change. In other programming languages, there are internal differences between things that are encased in double quotations and things that are encased in single quotations. So just be aware of that fact. But in Python, there's absolutely no difference between double quotations and single quotations. The double quotations have a nice property of reminiscing about talking, which I really appreciate about them, but it is actually a lot easier to type with just those single quotations because you don't have to use the shift key as you're typing. And so very frequently in the future, when I'm dealing with string literals or the print function, you might see me switch from the double quotations to the single quotations. In fact, you might see me go back and forth between the notations. They mean exactly the same thing in Python, and so it's just a matter of what's most convenient to me at the time, and there's no actual difference in meaning in Python to strings that have the double quotes and strings that have the single quotes.